Hi everyone, welcome back. In this video, we will understand Angular Spring Boot full stack application architecture in a simple and beginner-friendly way. This is one of the most common architectures used to build modern full stack web applications. Angular is used for the front end. Spring Boot is used for the back end. And a database like MySQL or PostgreSQL is used to store the application data. The main idea is very simple. Angular handles the user interface. Spring Boot handles the backend logic and REST APIs. The database stores and returns the actual data. Now let's understand how the complete flow works from the user to the database and back. The flow starts with the user or browser. A user opens the web application in a browser and interacts with the Angular frontend. For example, the user may open a dashboard, submit a login form, search products, place an order, or update profile details. Angular is responsible for building this front-end experience. It contains UI components, pages, forms, services, routing, validations, and client-side logic. Components are used to build different parts of the user interface. For example, a login component, product list component, header component, or order details component. Routing helps Angular navigate between pages without reloading the entire website. For example, moving from the home page to the products page, or from the products page to the cart page. Angular services are commonly used to keep reusable logic in one place. One important use of Angular services is calling backend APIs. This is where the HTTP client comes in. Angular HTTP client sends HTTP requests from the front end to the Spring Boot backend. For example, Angular can send a GET request to fetch data. It can send a POST request to create new data. It can send a POT request to update existing data. And it can send a delete request to remove data. The communication between Angular and Spring Boot usually happens using REST APIs and JSON. REST API defines the endpoint and action. JSON is the data format used for request and response. For example, Angular may send user details as JSON to the backend. Spring Boot processes the request and sends the result back as JSON. Now the request reaches the Spring Boot backend. Inside Spring Boot, the request first reaches the controller layer. The controller is responsible for handling HTTP request. For example, if Angular calls an API to get all users, the controller receives that request. If Angular submits a form to create a new product, the controller receives that data. The controller does not usually contain heavy business logic. Its main job is to accept the request, call the correct service method, and return the response. After the controller, the request goes to the service layer. The service layer contains the business logic of the application. This is where important rules are applied. For example, checking whether a user is valid, calculating order totals, applying discounts, checking stock availability, or validating business conditions. The service layer keeps the application logic clean and organized. After the service layer, the request goes to the repository layer. The repository layer is responsible for data access. It talks to the database using technologies like Spring Data, JPA. For example, if the service needs to save a user, fetch products, update an order, or delete a record, it calls the repository layer. The repository layer converts those operations into database queries and communicates with the database. Now the request reaches the database. The database can be MySQL, PostgreSQL, or another database. It stores application data such as users, products, orders, payments, roles, and other records. Once the database operation is completed, the data starts coming back. The database returns the result to the repository layer. The repository returns it to the service layer. The service layer applies any required business logic and returns the result to the controller. The controller prepares the HTTP response and sends it back to Angular as JSON. Now Angular receives the JSON response. Angular updates the user interface based on that response. For example, it may show a list of records, display a success message, show validation errors, update a table, or navigate the user to another page. So the complete flow is easy to remember. User interacts with the browser. Angular handles the front end. Angular sends a REST API request using HTTP client. The request goes to the Spring Boot controller. Controller calls the service layer. Service layer applies business logic. Repository layer talks to the database. The database returns data. Spring Boot sends a JSON response back to Angular. And Angular updates the page for the user. This architecture gives a clean separation of responsibilities. Angular focuses on the front-end experience. Spring Boot focuses on backend APIs and business logic. The database focuses on storing and retrieving data. This makes the application easier to develop, test, maintain, and scale. Front-end developers can work on Angular screens. Backend developers can work on Spring Boot APIs. Both sides communicate using REST API contracts and JSON data. This is why Angular plus Spring Boot is a powerful combination for full-stack applications.